Number 6. The human candle wick. You're a doctor in the 17th century, and you've been called to the scene of a bizarre accident. You walk into a room, and there's a pile of ash in the middle of the floor. The chair next to it is untouched, the curtains are fine, and the rest of the room is pristine. But the person who was sitting there is gone, reduced to nothing but a greasy pile of ash and a few small bones. The terrifying conclusion for centuries? Spontaneous human combustion. The idea was that a person could, without any external source of fire, just burst into flames. And this wasn't a fringe theory. It was a widely accepted medical and scientific explanation for many years. It was thought to be a side effect of heavy drinking, or a moral punishment, or just a random, terrifying act of nature. Scientists even tried to create it, soaking human fat in alcohol and setting it alight to see if it would burn down the way a candle does. The logic, as bizarre as it sounds, was that the body could become so saturated with flammable substances, like alcohol, that it could ignite from within. While modern science has debunked this, explaining these cases as a wick effect, where a person's clothes, soaked in fat from their own body, act like a candle wick, the sheer terror of it remains. The idea that your own body could betray you so spectacularly, becoming a kind of human-shaped bonfire at any moment, was a terrifyingly true possibility to your ancestors. Number 5. The invisible jello of space. You're a scientist in the 19th century, and you're trying to figure out how light works. We know that sound needs a medium to travel through, like air or water, but light can travel through the vacuum of space. So how does it do that? The most brilliant minds of the time came up with a terrifyingly true explanation. Space isn't a vacuum at all. It's filled with an invisible, undetectable substance called luminiferous ether. This ether was thought to be a kind of cosmic jello, an all-pervading medium that light waves surfed on. We were, for all intents and purposes, swimming through a substance that we could neither see, feel, nor interact with in any way. The existence of the ether was a scientific fact, a necessary component of physics. Then, in the late 1800s, two scientists named Michelson and Morley tried to prove it existed with a groundbreaking experiment, and they failed. Spectacularly, their experiment showed there was no ether at all. This discovery plunged physics into a crisis that lasted for decades. Until a young genius named Albert Einstein came along and solved the problem with his theory of relativity, effectively nuking the concept of the ether from orbit. The truly terrifying part is that for generations, the smartest people on Earth were operating on a fundamentally wrong premise about the universe. The entire cosmos was a lie, and the terrifying truth is that we could be doing the exact same thing today. Number 4. The hollow Earth. We've all looked up at the stars and wondered what's out there. But for centuries, some of the most respected minds in history were wondering about what's in here. The theory of the hollow Earth wasn't just a quirky ancient myth, it was a legitimately considered scientific hypothesis, especially during the 17th century. The idea was that the Earth wasn't a solid rock, but a hollow shell with a central sun, and that civilizations could live on the inside surface. It sounds like a premise for a B-movie from the 1950s, but it was taken seriously by some very smart people. One of the most famous proponents was none other than Edmund Halley, the astronomer who first predicted the orbit of Halley's comet. He proposed that the Earth was made up of 3 concentric spheres, all spinning at different speeds, to explain some weird compass readings. This was his serious, peer-reviewed attempt to explain a scientific problem. People were so convinced that explorers even mounted expeditions to the North and South Poles, believing they were gateways to the interior. The terrifying part isn't that people were silly enough to believe it. It's that for a while, it was a perfectly rational scientific way of thinking. The very ground you stand on could have been a thin crust, and beneath your feet was another world, another sun, and a whole other set of physics. The terrifying truth is that, for a long time, the smartest people on Earth thought we were just living on the roof. Number 3. The little man in the sperm. You're a scientist in the 17th century, a pioneer of microscopy, and you've just invented a device that can show you a world invisible to the naked eye. You put a drop of semen under your lens, and what you see blows your mind. Instead of just a bunch of wriggling cells, Some scientists claim to see a tiny, perfectly formed human, a miniature person curled up inside each sperm cell. They called this microscopic person a homunculus, or little man. This led to a widely accepted scientific theory called preformationism. The idea was that we were all preformed at the moment of creation, and we were just a bunch of human Russian nesting dolls. The homunculus just needed to be planted in a womb, and it would magically grow bigger, like a chia pet. It was a perfectly logical conclusion for the time, since they couldn't see the complex process of fertilization and cell division. But think about the terrifying implications of this. It meant that all of humanity was pre-packed into the first human, and we were just tiny, ever so slightly bigger copies of each other, unfolding across generations. This theory completely ignored the woman's contribution to reproduction, reducing her role to a human incubator. The terrifying truth is that for a long time, one of the most fundamental questions of biology was answered with a theory that can be best described as a scientific doodle. Number 2. The universe is a lie. Is anything really real? That's not just a stoner's question. It's a terrifyingly true scientific hypothesis that's been debated for centuries, from Plato's cave to the Matrix. But for a brief and terrifying period in the early 20th century, scientists faced a paradox that made this feel a little too real. They realized that when observing certain quantum particles, the act of observation itself changed the outcome. The particles didn't seem to have a definite state until they were measured. This led to a truly unsettling thought. Maybe reality isn't a fixed thing, but something that is only created when we look at it. The universe wasn't a grand, pre-programmed machine. It was a kind of cosmic rendering that only loaded what we were paying attention to. The implications were horrifying. We weren't just observers of the universe. We were, in some strange, unknowable way, co-creators of it. The very ground you stand on, the air you breathe, and the stars you see in the sky might just be a terrifyingly perfect simulation, a beautifully rendered illusion that only exists because you're there to see it. It's a scientific concept that forces you to question everything you've ever taken for granted. And the terrifying truth is that some of the greatest minds on the planet today are still wondering if it's true. Number 9. The cat dropping experiment. You're walking down the street, minding your own business, when you see it. A person holding a cat, a calm, unassuming feline, and they're about to drop it. But they're not just dropping it, they're holding it upside down, and with a flick of the wrist, they let it go. Before you can even scream animal cruelty, the cat has righted itself midair and lands perfectly on its feet, as if it had been planning the whole thing all along. We all know that cats always land on their feet. It's one of those universal facts of life, like gravity, or the fact that your phone will always fall face down on a hard surface. But did you know that for a brief, bizarre period in the late 19th century, scientists were so obsessed with this phenomenon, they decided to film it? The footage, which is now on YouTube, shows a series of cats being dropped from varying heights and angles, all of them performing the same mid-air pirouette. It's called the cat righting reflex, and it's a marvel of biology. They twist their bodies, use their tail for balance, and adjust their legs for the perfect landing. The disturbing part? The scientists who studied this, a French physiologist named Etienne Jules Marais and his assistant, were so intrigued that they designed a special camera to capture the motion. They weren't just dropping the cat. They were capturing its terrifyingly perfect, biologically driven gymnastics. Basically, your ancestors were so bored with the normal laws of physics that they created a cinematic masterpiece starring a very confused cat, just to prove something everyone already knew. Number 8. The frozen sun. Imagine you're a scientist in the 17th century. You're looking up at the sun, and you notice something strange. It's not just a big ball of fire. It has spots. But instead of seeing these sunspots as a natural phenomenon, a few astronomers, most notably Galileo, saw something else entirely. They were convinced that the sun wasn't a perfect, unchanging sphere. This was a radical, almost heretical idea, as the belief at the time was that celestial bodies were flawless and divine. Galileo, using his newfangled telescope, meticulously tracked these spots, and his work proved that the sun rotated. But then, a terrifying thought occurred to a few other researchers. What if the sun wasn't a hot ball of fire at all? What if it was a cold, dark body, and the light we were seeing was just a thin, burning shell? This wasn't a fringe theory. It was a serious proposal that even gained a bit of traction. The idea was that the sun was a frozen, dark body, and the light came from a thin layer of fire on its surface. The implications were horrifying. If the sun was just a cold rock with a campfire on top, the fire could go out at any time. The idea of the sun freezing over or the fire being extinguished became a real terrifying possibility. So while we look at the sun and see a life-giving star, our ancestors saw a terrifying, unstable rock that could plunge the world into darkness at any moment, all because a few scientists got a little too creative with their hypotheses. Number 7. The mesmerizing magnetism. Imagine you've got a headache, a real doozy, a pounding in your temples that's making you miserable. You call the doctor, and he arrives not with a spoonful of medicine, but with a pair of magnets. He tells you that your body is full of an invisible fluid, a kind of animal magnetism, and that your pain is caused by a blockage in the flow of this mystical liquid. The cure? He starts waving his hands over your body, not even touching you, but making grand, sweeping gestures, sometimes even using a special wand or the aforementioned magnets. This was called mesmerism, and it was a perfectly legitimate scientific theory in the late 18th century, championed by a doctor named Franz Mesmer. The idea was that this universal fluid connected all living things, and that a skilled practitioner could manipulate it to cure a wide range of ailments, from headaches to blindness. This sounds like a quirky, New Age crystal-waving convention, but it was taken with extreme seriousness. Mesmer even had a special baquet, a giant tub filled with water and iron filings where multiple patients would hold hands and get their magnetism adjusted at the same time. While the theory of a magical fluid was eventually debunked by a commission led by none other than Benjamin Franklin, the practice of mesmerism led directly to the study of hypnosis. The terrifying truth here isn't the magic fluid, but the fact that our ancestors were so desperate for a scientific explanation of the mind and body that they fell for a theory that, in hindsight, sounds like a wizard's prank. Your ancestors thought they were getting medical care, but they were really just paying a charlatan to wave his hands at them with a straight face.